topics with people who don't share your same beliefs. Your host, Katrina Esau, Sabrina Protic, Ricky Burney, and Walter Parker. Now let's get ready to have that conversation. Uncomfortable Conversations is powered by the Trendsetter Mentor Group, an exclusive membership for mentorship on Facebook.
Good morning, everyone. I'm down here in balmy Florida. And, really, I've seen people all bundled up, and I imagine it's pretty chilly in our area.
I can't hear anything.
Yeah. I think Julian doesn't even have a sweater on. So welcome to our show. This is Uncomfortable Conversation. My name is Sabrina Protic. I'm a life and financial coach and author of the book, Growing Ageless, Think Young and Live Younger. We also have our co-host with us, Walter Parker. He is a divisional sales manager of Contour Mortgage Corporation. Ricky Burney will be with us next week. He's one of our co-hosts, and he is author of a book, Destined for Greatness, and we look forward to having him with us next week. We bring this show to you each week. Our mission is to encourage, equip, and empower our listeners and viewers to have uncomfortable conversations on personal and social issues that impact our lives. Each week, we choose topics that create a pause, just a stop for a minute, and a reflection in our lives on a systematic issues such as racism, criminal justice, police brutality, and our trending topic today. So today we're going to be talking about one of the most uncomfortable conversations that affect many of us. And we're going to have our guests kind of weigh in on that. We're going to be talking today on the issue of marriage. So we have our distinguished panelists today with different perspectives, and we're going to kind of bring them in for a minute. We have with us Bernie Mock. He's the co-founder of Moza Digital. Good morning, Bernie.
Morning, Sabrina.
We have Julian Wiley. He's an entrepreneur and senior tax accountant. I guess he'll weigh in on us when he comes back. We have Ariel Giordano. She's an award-winning author, life coach, professional dancer, and certified instructor. So good morning, Ariel. You're muted.
Okay.
Good morning. Okay, and we have another one of our distinguished guests, Dr. Katrina Esau. She's the CEO at K3 Worldwide Enterprises. Good morning, Dr. Katrina.
Good morning, Sabrina. How are you?
Wonderful. Well, we're going to be talking about something that's right in your wheelhouse, Dr. Katrina. We're going to be talking about the issue of marriage and some of the elements and some of the taboo conversations and topics. Will you tell us how long you've been married, and then why did you decide to write your book on marriage?
So I actually, Christmas Day will be 25 years we'll be celebrating. So I am excited about that. My husband and I have been together for about 27 years, but Christmas Day will be our 25th wedding anniversary. I wrote my book, The Pain of Infidelity, Birth Purpose, because about 17 years ago, my husband and I separated because of infidelity. And so I wanted to share my story with other women that may have had that same encounter, and just to encourage them that there is life after marriage, there is hope, and there is a blueprint to becoming whole, which happens to be actually the title of the journal that goes along with my book. So that's why I wrote my story.
Excellent. We certainly look forward to hearing more from you, and all of our guests all have had some years logged in on marriage. We're going to start our conversation based on an article written by Dr. Dana, and an article that she wrote for Strong Marriages now in January 15, 2015. She wrote this: "We may think that some things are better left unspoken. We may like to adhere to a policy of not making waves or follow that old adage No talking politics or religion. We may avoid certain topics because they may make us uncomfortable, or we may still avoid other topics because we know they may make our spouse angry or uncomfortable. Unfortunately, though, some of these uncomfortable conversations are things that we just need to talk about. Once we get through the discomfort, our marriages will be better off in the long run. While some topics might be off limits for casual acquaintances or coworkers, this is a marriage that we're talking about here. If we're going to commit your life and heart to another person, we're going to share a home. We're going to be sharing finances and a bed. You will likely want to know your spouse's standards, comments, and feelings on certain topics that affect both of you. Your spouse is not just an acquaintance. You can just say, I agree or disagree. It doesn't quite work that way. We all know that being married. And you just go your merry way. When you're divided on serious topics, the disagreement will come up over and over and over again. Does anyone on this panel disagree with Dr. Dana on this topic? Well, we'll get your perspectives in a minute. So before we discuss the 10 most important conversations, we must have one of our partners that we will briefly interview on a YouTube channel. So, Alan, I think you've got something for us. Whew.
Well, as we all try to rebound from the pandemic, recent surveys show that divorce rates have surged across the country this year, and divorce filings increased by as much as 34% more than last year. Now, researchers say the increase in divorce rates started just 3 weeks into the COVID-19 lockdowns. In southern Colorado, marriage counselors, well, they say not all is lost, but it will take some work to save relationships that are feeling the strain of this difficult year.
When you're quarantined and when you are under the same roof or those kinds of things, you can't get away from that. And so it's almost like you are faced with your problems now in a way that is, you have two options. Either I become honest and vulnerable and I want to work on my stuff, or I run. And I know that's really, like, I'm not pulling any punches with that statement, but like that's basically what it is. It's a truth moment.
Boy, we can all face those. Dr. Mark Mayfield also says getting help to overcome family burnout can be especially important for parents and kids right now. We've got a lot of resources posted if you want to try and tap into them at koaa.com/rebound.
Uncomfortable Conversations Talk Radio is sponsored by the Trendsetter Mentor Group, an exclusive membership for mentorship. You can follow all our hosts on Facebook. Search Trendsetter Mentor Group and join. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to Uncomfortable Conversations. Our topic today is imperative because the pandemic has caused many spouses and partners to pivot from working on jobs to working at home, and children with attending school to Zoom school. Imagine the impact this has had on relationships around the world, and need to have uncomfortable conversations on topics that in the past were rushed just, under the rug. So we're going to unpack 10 topics of conversation we need to have with our spouse or partner in 2021. Our panel will lean in on their perspective and experience on having these conversations. So let's start with number one. Let's talk about jealousy. In any relationship, there's a risk of jealousy. It is a part of human nature to feel possessive to some degree, and is equally natural to sometimes feel threatened. This is much more that jealousy of other people, though. In a marriage, nearly anything that occupies time and attention can cause jealousy, from the kids to a job, from hobbies to spending time with friends and family. Jealousy is a powerful emotion, and it can lead to all kinds of arguments, accusations, and trust issues. If you are feeling jealous, speak up and do your best to remain calm while you discuss it with your partner. Even sitting down to discuss previous experiences with jealousy, reaffirm your commitment to each other, and get a feel for how your partner might react in certain situations. Let's start with, I'm going to call on Ariel. Let's start with you. Tell us your take as far as on jealousy in marriage.
Muted.
Muted.
She keeps muting. Jeez.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right. I think I have it backwards. Anyway, so it really stems from the core of the individual who's feeling jealous. They feel some threat from the other person for them, their time being compromised in some way. And it's the way that person, the husband or wife or the partner in that relationship feels about themselves. So it's threatening the way that they feel about themselves. And if you're confident and you know who you are and you really love yourself and you balance your own, satisfy your own needs, then you're not as threatened by the other person. So you take responsibility for your own self and your own actions in the relationship. So you're not dependent on the other person to make you happy. Well, I'm happier when you watch TV with me, or we watch movies together, we eat dinner together. So you're able to satisfy your own needs for your own self. So you're independent and interdependent in that relationship. So that's what I would say about jealousy. So when you feel really self-confident and you love yourself and you're happy with yourself, you're not as threatened by jealousy or other things that your partner may do.
That's a great point. Definitely can agree with that. Dr. Katrina, I'm going to ask you the same question. Tell us about the impact of jealousy in a relationship, and your take on that, and really some things there. Because I think Ariel was saying, hey, it has more to do with your self-love and yourself than it does with the actions of your partner. Why don't you weigh in on that as well?
I think jealousy definitely is something that we have to be aware of. Personally, I can't say that I've ever really experienced jealousy per se in our marriage. And I think that's primarily because my husband has always, he's always given me in terms of like the time and stuff like that. I've never had to compete with, other people or activities or anything like that. And so the one thing that I love about my husband is he's always the first to tell me, like, if I'm going out somewhere and I'm dressed nice, he makes sure that he's the first to tell me. He always says that he should be the first person that tells me that I look nice. And so I think things like that matter. I will say, like, I've had friends where there's been like a jealousy sort of competition type thing where if like the wife or the husband makes more money, then there's tension there with jealousy, but I haven't had that. I'm the breadwinner in our home and my husband respects that. I've never really had an encounter to say where, he's jealous of me or I'm jealous of him, but it's definitely something that we have to be aware of in our relationships. And I would agree with Ariel in terms of our confidence. I think that has a definite bearing on it, but I think also it ties to how you treat one another and just making sure, like even when my husband and I separated 17 years ago, the one thing is he still was one of my biggest cheerleaders. So I think it says a lot based upon the relationship that you have. And I'm pretty sure it ties to some of these other areas that we're going to touch on today as well.
Excellent points. And speaking of jealousy, let's talk about children a little bit. Not everyone wants children. And if you, even if you already have kids, not everyone agrees on how to raise them. So there'll always be room for differing opinions on what they should eat, what they should wear, when they should go to bed, how to discipline them, et cetera. And, it is important to understand, however, that we often feel so strongly about what's right for the kids because we care about them so much. Even if you're fighting with your spouse, you're both coming from a place of the children's best interest. So you might not agree on what it is, if you have kids, or thinking about having kids, you sit down with your spouse and lay it all on the table. Talk about your individual experiences as children with parents and the kind of parents you hope to be. Talk about your principles and your ideas. And then the closer you can get to agreeing on parental styles and responsibilities, the less likely you are run into disagreements later. Bernie, I'm going to go to you on this one. With kids, why don't you weigh in as far as on the impact of marriage and parenting, because this is a tough one. We're all raised from different backgrounds, especially sometimes when we end up marrying someone who maybe was raised in a different area of the country, different parenting, divorced home, married home, how it impacts on how we raise our children. Why don't you weigh in for us on that, Bernie?
Sure. Well, I'm coming with a little different perspective. I've been married 50 years in February. I have two daughters, 48 and 39, 4 grandchildren, and a great grandson. So I'm kind of coming at this from a different perspective, maybe than some. Actually, a lot. I did agree with the first topic with Ariel and with the doctor. I personally have had a very strong marriage because my wife and I are great communicators with each other. As far as our children go, they're very successful. They have great children that themselves are doing a great job raising them. Grandparents have a great opportunity to do things that they kind of missed out on the first time. So I've taken much more time to be involved in sports and their activities. It's just wonderful. Actually, today, my granddaughter in Phoenix is flying back from college. We're very close to Aubrey. We love our kids and our grandkids, and now our great grandson, which is amazing. I can't believe I'm living to see this. But it's just a unique opportunity because we all live within about 2 miles of each other, which has never happened until about 8 or 9 years ago. So that's unusual in today's society because before that, everybody was all across the country. So now we don't have to fly, luckily, and we can all get together. So I think a lot of the problems right now in America are communication problems. People just don't let each other know where they're at and what's going on. So that's kind of my take. I hope that's something valid for some of us older folk, but we're very active with our children and grandchildren. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, it's an interesting topic in my household as well. My parents were married for over 40 plus years, so I can appreciate being married 50 years on that. It's a magnificent feat this day and age. Sabrina, why don't you weigh in on this as well, as far as with kids?
Well, so I was married 20 years in my first marriage, and now I'm 5 years in my second. We have 2 beautiful children, adult kids now. But I had to say, I had to learn how to balance the children in the relationship because I'd been a new mom. I kind of put my kids ahead of my husband. I can't say I didn't know any better. It's just, he felt like an outsider for a while. And I think there should be that conversation about children. I'm just being honest. There should be that conversation about children and how they'll be handled. We need to learn to balance that because nothing should come between a man and a wife. I firmly believe that. Children should enhance that relationship, not take away from it. So I think we really need to balance that, and the yes and the no part, and who do they go to, mom and dad, and who's got the final say. Kids will try to play parent against parent. So I think that that's something that needs a little bit more work in our society because, parents bring the kids into the world. They should co-parent. Even if there's a divorce, there should still be co-parenting. I've seen destructive behavior when this happens. And so, I think that's something that definitely needs to be discussed before the marriage. It needs to be continually tweaked during the marriage. And if there's a separation in marriage, that needs some serious discussion about how that's going to be handled.
I can absolutely agree. And I'll even weigh in just real quickly on this because I was married before with no children for 10 years. And then my current marriage that I'm in, 9 years strong. And she actually had a child from a previous marriage. So blended families, having this conversation, we thought we had talked about it and covered it a good bit, but not only when you're co-parenting, but now you got to add a third parent in there to, I would say also join you with co-parenting. A lot of dynamics. It could be very stressful in a relationship. We've seen it really kind of just change the entire dynamic of when you think about getting married and having kids of your own. And we've had 2 more kids since then. It is I think you brought up a great point, Sabrina, as far as about kids playing one parent to the other. They learn very, very quickly the love languages of each parent, and they will use that against you I know my 5-year-old, she knows I love hugs and affection, but she's also the one that pushes and tests boundaries, probably much more than the other two. And so these dynamics definitely weigh in. It really causes you better have great communication, because if you don't have a communication breakdown, that's where, when we don't talk and when we go periods of time where we're busy with life and work and trying to co-parent, it really can take a toll with children. And speaking of children, that's going to bring us to our third point, money. Let's talk about money real quick, because it causes stress for just about everybody. And when you're sharing finances with another person, it is easy for things to get tense. I believe everybody knows this one. Couples might disagree on how money is being spent, have arguments about who is bringing in more income, and even fight about very minor purchases, simply because money is already an ongoing issue in the relationship. If you're going to share finances, establish a family budget that you both agree on and can both stick to. Discuss what expenses are the most important and what is just extra. Even if you have disagreements later, you will have a foundation and a budget to fall back on. Dr. Katrina, can you weigh in as far as how important is money in a marriage?
I believe money is very important in a marriage, and it is important to communicate goals and how you plan to spend monies. Early on in my marriage, that's something we did not do. I was horrible with it because of what I had seen modeled before me. And so I was of the mindset of mine. I work hard and I do whatever I want to do with my money type of thing. And it's just not the case. You have to have a conversation about the money, your goals. I would spend money like it was nobody's business, but I've learned that that's not appropriate, and to have conversations. And so we have it now where, we have an account that's solely for bills, then we have, he money and she money, and we have savings. And so I think it's very important to have a conversation, because you can be striving toward one thing, and if you haven't had that conversation, your spouse might be doing something else that's total counterproductive to what you're working toward. So I think it's important to have the conversation about goals and what your intents are, and then also being responsible. And if you need to split, the finances out, where you have an account to where it's solely, your money goes in there for the bills, and then you have where you're saving, and then you have an account where we call it he money and she money, where, my she money, I do whatever I want to do with my she money. But, it does not, come from our responsibility bucket. So I think finances are huge in a marriage. And a lot of times when you don't have conversations around it, people always say it's the number one reason for divorce, but I think it just goes back to communication and not talking about it.
Excellent points. Yeah, it can be very stressful. I know when you have a good bit of it, it's amazing. You still have some problems. And when you don't have a good bit of it, it can still cause some problems. Ariel, why don't you weigh in as well? What is your feedback on money and the impact it has on marriage?
I agree with Dr. Katrina, and it has a huge impact on marriage. And again, it really goes back to communication, the personal goals of each other, and working together as one unit, and how you're going to handle your money. I know I've been married for 5 years now, and we also went to a professional to talk to about our money situation, to help have a third party in there and balance it out for retirement and that. So I would encourage couples to do that as well, to have an outsider person to help you balance out your finances. And then you're sitting with someone else, so the conversation expands, and different issues that their spouse may not have. Between the two of you, it may trigger some other conversations and broaden the conversation to other areas of both your money. So that's what I would say about money, communicating.
Yeah, and I like how you talked about there our fourth topic, which was a great segue straight into time. Time and money, time spent, as far as on even the previous three topics we just talked about, but time is the constant struggle. There are never enough hours in the day to take care of the chores and the kids, to make meals, to get to and from work, to make projects. and to simply find time to spend with your spouse. The two of you can agree to ally against your common foe, time, and work together to be efficient and time conscious and not let the hours slip away, which will only make you more stressed and able to spend even less time together. Just like your monetary budget, you can also agree on a time budget. This is very important. Determine how to meet your needs and then decide what to do with the rest. If you are on the same page as your spouse, you will find a lot more time to do the things you enjoy. Bernie, why don't you weigh in on this? With 50 years of marriage, how have you managed time with your spouse? And tell us about some of the times you've struggled with it and how you guys overcame it.
Sure. I was fortunate enough 20 years ago to work with Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen spent 8 days with me and a group from Ford on time management. It changed my life. It changed about everything I do. I work ridiculous hours because I'm an owner of 2 companies now, not just one. But because I start so early before my wife is even awake, we schedule time together. Evenings from dinner on is with her. We schedule all the events with our grandchildren that we want. I'm not a person that sits still very long, as Sabrina can share. But I can tell you that being organized and understanding time management, I control everything. My phone, our texting, our email communications, and how I do my daily schedule. So I just personally, since I got to work with Stephen, it changed, like I said, everything about how I look at time. It's our only thing we can't really know exactly what's going to happen next, because all of us have things that happen every day we don't expect. But time management's very important in a marriage. And if you work on it and schedule it, I think you can really be successful with your mate. And as far as money goes, my wife handles it all. I just make it, and she's the one that controls. She just gives me what I need, and we're good to go. So that's how I handle the money part. I'll make it, and she'll manage it. So that's what we do. So I hope that helps. That's something I highly recommend, is that book. It changed everything about the way I do things. So I highly recommend.
Sabrina, why don't you also weigh in on this time and the constant struggle there is?
Yeah, I've always, of course, I struggle with time anyway, but on the basis of making time, again, this is something that we should have a conversation with our mates, actually during the courtship and during the marriage, because these elements can creep in, just finding time for one another, scheduling time. For instance, here's a scenario: what time are you going to get the kids to bed so that we can have adult time? I used to have a problem with that. By the time I got everybody down and kids down, I was too tired to even have a conversation with my husband. And we finally had to have a conversation about not having a conversation. So you've got to schedule that time together where you can converse, even date night. And my present husband and I, we have date night. Every Friday night is date night. There's no time for girlfriend time and chit chatting and going all off and running shopping. Our whole friendship circle knows that is our time together. And that's the time we get to really talk and communicate. And sometimes it's just having fun. But having a conversation with your mate about communication is very important, because sometimes your mate, they won't tell you that they're having certain feelings about it. They won't tell you. You're always in your phone. You're always talking. You got business meetings. I know Bernie's a very busy businessman, and he's done 500 and something Zooms. Where is that time? So you've got to schedule the time, but more importantly, do a temperature check. Talk to your mate, say, hey, how are we doing on time and communication? Are there any concerns that you have, any areas that we need to improve on, so that we keep the marriage intact, keep the marriage whole? Because something like that, and I know I'm guilty, and my phone is running up and running down, we actually cheat our mates. So that's very important. Walter, with that being said, what we're going to do now, we're going to go to break. And when we come back, we're going to have more uncomfortable conversations on the topic of marriage.
For a lot of us, this is an unusual situation where we might be spending a lot more time with our spouse or significant other than we previously had. And we also don't have access to some of the other social relationships that we would access. You know, our friends aren't available to us, our family isn't available to us in the same way. So it's natural in those environments that there might be more conflict as there are more opportunities for conflict. In addition, there's the stress. There's a lot of stress around COVID with the illness, the relaunch, with issues around work and finances. And so I think it's important that when conflict comes up, that we find ways to respond in love, respect, that you find ways to take space apart or time apart, to cool off and figure out what is the core issue. Is this just that we've spent some time together and we're getting on one another's nerves, or is this an issue that really needs to be dealt with? So no relationship's perfect. Every relationship has conflict, and it's okay to need time apart. You shouldn't feel bad about that, and you shouldn't feel bad if your partner requests it or needs it as well. See it as a healthy thing in terms of maintaining the relationship, that you're setting boundaries and limits that's preventing additional conflict. So first, I'd suggest that it's important to set aside time where it can be the two of you just connecting one-on-one. That can be challenging when there's kids at home, but it's important that you have an opportunity to talk to one another about how you're feeling, how you're doing, but then also finding opportunities for fun, things that you can do together that you both enjoy, whether it be hobbies or activities or exercise, or something that allows you to interact with one another where it doesn't have to be very high pressure, where there's no conflict, where you can build positive memories together. It's regular routine maintenance for relationships. It just becomes more important during times like this.
Together, we do amazing things every day.
Welcome back to Uncomfortable Conversations. We're going to further our panel discussion on some of the issues that need to be discussed. And we're going to hone in on something right now that I think is very dicey. I'm going to say a lot of times it's going to be a little dicey for women too, because we just have to know everything. It's just our need to know. And this particular topic is on history. Your history. So certainly when you're dating someone and contemplating marrying them and spending the rest of your life, you have a need to know history. And you're entitled to know history, or do you think you are? So the question here is that we're going to talk to our panelists about is the history. You know, should you discuss the history with your potential mate? Is it something, we have some skeletons in our closet. Are some of these skeletons so relevant to us today that they actually affect our behavior, our perspectives in life, how we view and feel about certain things? Maybe it was an old relationship, maybe something with our parents, a mother or a father, maybe something educational in our background, or some underlying issue that really impacted us now that's bleeding over into who we are now. So should we have a conversation about the history of your potential mate or marriage mate and how these things could impact, or do we just don't talk about it? Because sometimes you can dip into a certain area of that person's life because you did discuss the history, and then a whole behavior erupts. Do you sweep that under the carpet? Do we just, oh, well, that was just your mother, your father, your sister? So out of respect for our mates, the question is going to be to one of you is history important? And should you have that uncomfortable conversation? And how deep do you drill down? So I'm going to go to Dr. Katrina on this one. Dr. Katrina, what about history?
So that is dicey. I think history is important, and I think you have to have the conversation. I don't know how deep, though, that I would go, and it probably just depends on what's coming up out of the surface conversation. I think for me, especially if you had asked me this 25 years ago, was it important then? Yes. But it's even more important, I think, now, because it's where times are changing. We're in a society where, anything goes almost. And so I would not even think about being in the dating game now is scary to me. So I definitely think you have to have the conversation. Like, it's important to me, to know what type of relationship you had with your parents, what type of relationship your parents have, some of that family history, as well as your personal history in terms of your, how many people you've been with, because that gives me insight into my security in terms of, being exposed to sexual diseases and things like that. So I would definitely have the conversation. How deep I dig is probably going to be contingent upon the answers that I'm getting.
Thank you, Dr. Katrina. Let's have Ariel weigh in on that.
I would say history is important because for the openness and vulnerability and intimacy of the relationship, to have information for both partners available. And it also gives a more complete picture of who your partner is. And past behavior can, more likely create future behavior as well. So I would, in my relationship, am definitely interested in knowing the history of my husband, and just to create more intimacy, more depth, and to know who he really is, and give a different perspective of how he became how the partner became who they are by their history, because we learn and grow from all our experiences. And so I would say it's definitely important. And to just see if there's any red flags in the past. Excuse me?
No, that wasn't me.
Okay.
Thank you, Ariel. I'm going to roll to another segment of this. So this is intimacy. I've heard it said that it's something women want to talk about, men don't want to talk about it, or women talk about it amongst each other, and men don't talk about it. But now we're talking about a relationship during the dating process, and even in marriage. Should you talk about that? Because that can have a great impact. Let's say, with the demands on all of us on time, sometimes you just be too tired. But what about how that other mate feels? So I'm going to go to the middle of this question. Let's hear from Bernard. Should you have a conversation about intimacy?
There's a lot of echo here. I would say this about it. I think every 10 years or so it changes. and I have to admit, as we grow older, things that were important in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s are different. And I see a cycle of about 10 years where it changes. It's a topic that right now I'm dealing with. I know, Sabrina, and I think with health issues, as we grow older, things change. And that's basically where I'm coming from on this topic. And I think it's very important in any marriage that I liked Sabrina's comments on date night. We did that for years. We do it actually every Friday night with a small group. And we look forward to being with each other and sharing and having a meal, that type of thing. We actually go out socially, do things. But I think as we age, things change. That would be my comments, Sabrina.
Thank you, Bernie, and thank you for your transparency. And Bernie's pretty straightforward. That's one of the reasons why he's a guest on the show, and he has had that conversation. And I really like what you said, Bernie. I'm going to agree. Things do change. So you do need to do a temperature check every 10 years because our bodies change. You know, we're not spring chickens. Some of us maybe, but I'm not. So I think that's a great, I'm going to agree with you on that, Bernie. Let's go to Walter on that. Walter, you're a married man here with children. I think you're still raising kids. So what's that topic?
Yeah. It is a topic we do discuss quite often, especially when there's longer periods without intimacy. Me and my wife have both noticed that, when we do go, the longer the period that goes in between, whether it be life, kids, we just had a big move from Florida to Colorado, took a lot out of us. But we do realize how much closer we do feel when there is intimacy, physical intimacy in the marriage. Really has an emotional and, to some levels of spiritual connection, much more to each other, the way we approach it. I didn't always have the best outlook and approach to intimacy growing up because honestly, I didn't have a lot of conversations about it. Didn't really have a lot of experience. When I met my first wife, I was a virgin. So getting married and kind of having an unhealthy approach and look at intimacy caused some issues in my first marriage and even at the beginning of this marriage until we had more honest conversation about it. So it's interesting. It is something that, as a guy, I can honestly say that statistic and the thing you were reading about, first probably 3-4 years of marriage, just didn't talk about a lot. We had intimacy, but we didn't really go deep. And because of that caused some erosion in our marriage and caused some, kind of button of the heads and not even knowing it. A friend of mine used to always say, marriage a lot of times you don't want to fall into that trap of unwritten contracts, where you hold somebody else to a standard that you've never discussed with them about. And that's a big danger. And I think a lot of times with intimacy, we kind of do that. We just assume that our partner should know certain things about us, especially even after being together for a while. So it's really important to constantly check in and have that conversation. I know it is for me and it is for my wife as well. And so it's still a work in progress, I'd say, after 9 years of marriage and even after 3 kids. We obviously know what it takes to get children, so we know about it, but there's a deeper level as far as being that emotional needs with the physical. And I think that's been the hardest lesson and we're still just continuing learning about.
Walter, thank you so much. I tell you, these men are bringing it very, very, very transparent. Thank you for your honesty. I watched a Meryl Streep movie many years ago. Can't think of the name of it, but it was this topic. So to Bernie's point, they had been married number of years. They were kind of maybe in their 50s, I want to say. And she was feeling a need, some kind of need. She wanted to talk about intimacy. He didn't. She finally got him to go to therapy or counseling, or maybe she went, and it was a really big thing for her. And to Walter's point, it was a make or break. It could have been a relationship breaker, but the underlying thing is she really loved him. They loved each other, but he didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to address it, and she did, and it created major conflicts. And I think this movie was written for that very reason, because couples were not talking about it, and it was impacting another one of the mates. And because the conversation was never tabled, they have to live with the residual damages. So yes, as always, as Bernie said, a work in progress. As Walter said, it can still impact a relationship years to come. So thank you for everybody being transparent. Let's talk about something else. Let's go to politics and religion. I'm gonna lump them all in there together. They can be very divisive, but they can also unify. Should you have that conversation with your potential mate, and even married now? We can look at our present climate of politics and religion and how it's even dividing countries. Could it divide a household? Should you talk about that? And should you have barriers and limitations? Should you have closed doors on some of those things? So let's kind of weigh in on that. Let's go with Dr. Katrina on that one. The topics of politics and religion. What are your thoughts on that in terms of should you discuss it or not?
think it's with me, I think it's important to talk about everything. I mean, communication is just huge for me. Politics and religion, I know it can be something that, it can get very dicey. I'll say, for like my husband and I, when we met, when you talk about religion, like I was raised Baptist, he was raised Catholic. And so when we came into our marriage, we were both, heels in. I'm not changing, he's not changing, nobody's changing denominations. And so it did not cause a rift, but it definitely caused strain because, I'm like, I'm not visiting a Catholic church. He, didn't want to come to Baptist. And I'm like, you know what? I don't care where you go, just go somewhere on a Sunday, it's different than what I believe, but we ultimately ended up transitioning to a non-denominational church. And so not that it really changed like the core of who we are, but it allowed us to be able to at least fellowship together at church, because that was important for me, for us to both be in the house of God, And so I think it's a conversation you have to have, because when you don't talk about things, it causes division, it causes strife. And even though you may suppress it, at some point it's going to come out. And so I definitely think it's worth the conversation. And then you have to see where you can, meet in the middle. And for me, the meeting in the middle was, you don't necessarily have to convert to a Baptist, but you got to go. Even if you go to Catholic service on Sunday, I don't care. Go. I'm just going to go where I go. But the having a spiritual relationship, having a relationship with God was important.
Thank you, Dr. Katrina. And even raising the children. If it's a divided household, politically or spiritually, what's going to happen with the children? Let's go to Bernie on this for a brief comment.
So the Bible says that if we're
what are your thoughts on politics and religion?
What I was going to say is the Bible says if we're unequally yoked, the marriage is probably going to fail. My wife and I were not believers when we got married, but we did 4 or 5 years later. We both agree on our belief system with Jesus Christ and the Bible. Our daughters were brought up in Christian school, and they both teach at a Christian school. Both my son-in-laws are pastors. On politics, we agree on principles. That's what my wife and I agree on. And we are we are against a lot of things that our society is accepting as it's okay. We're not. We're going to stick with what biblical principles are. They don't change. And we're very firm in our belief system together. And we have what we call the third rail, and that is our relationship with Jesus in our marriage. That's my comment.
Thank you, Bernie. And I know how grounded Bernie is. I thought that would be a great question for him. We've had some great conversations. Thank you for weighing in on that. We're going to go to break, and when we come back, we're going to do a little segment on Love It or Leave It.
Now it's time for Love It or Leave It, the segment where our hosts decide should you have that uncomfortable conversation or leave it alone.
Welcome back to Uncomfortable Conversation. This is our segment on Love It or Leave It, where our listeners email us with some critical topics that's important to them. And my question is going to be to you: should you have the conversation or leave it? So our first email is, she's an RN at a hospital that she works at, and they're requiring all staff nurses to take the coronavirus vaccine. I'm very uneasy about taking the COVID-19 vaccination, but I do not want to lose my job or upset my ICU doctors. Should I have this conversation or leave it alone? Walter, what are your thoughts on that? Muted, Walter.
Sorry, man, that mute button can get all of us. I tell you, I think it's a sticky situation. I actually would say I would approach it. So I guess you'd say love it, but just be very careful on how it's approached. Not very strong, like I'm not going to take it, but maybe ask some more clarifying information to help you be a little more comfortable, or find out where the boundaries are at. Is this going to be your job if you do not take it? Or if there is some concessions that be made or different departments they may even move you to? I would get more information and background on this. It'd be tough to say coming from an outsider's point, but I would probably at least have that conversation, because I believe, you're injecting something to your body. You need to be the one comfortable with that, regardless. So just depends on how far you're willing to take this. If it may mean your job, then that's going to be something you have to address and be okay with either way.
Thank you. Ariel, will you weigh in on that for us?
I would say definitely have the conversation, and also really investigate what is in, the ingredients of the vaccine, and also the legalities of where's the boundary of, the line that's being crossed of, this is my body and I'm responsible for my own body, and how does that, the legalities of that with my employment. But I would do my research. So I would have, research behind my conversation before I had it. That's what I would do. Definitely have it.
Thank you. We'll do one last email. My husband watches Fox 13 24/7. I'm worried he's going to do something that he's going to regret if they don't overturn the election. I wanted to ask him why he was so crazy about our current president, but I'm not sure he understands himself. Yesterday, I saw him reading some information about the Proud Boys on their internet site, and I was floored. Should I have this conversation? Dr. Katrina.
Why would you ask me that question?
Oh
my God. Wow. I when I think about the fact that an election, a president, would cause a rift in families, it blows my mind. Like, you have to live with your spouse. This is probably, I hope people don't take it the wrong way, but it's just not that deep. It's not that important to tear up your whole family and your house because of politics. And, that probably just stemmed out of my position in it. I would probably have the conversation, but from a different perspective. I would have the conversation from the perspective of, the concern of it, bringing division into our home, not so much about trying to persuade him or, making him understand why I feel the way I do about the current president, the president coming in, whatever. But I'm more concerned about the sanctity of my home.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that honesty. Bernie, would you have that conversation?
Yeah, I would just go ahead and cut his television off and put on YouTube and put on aquarium videos. It sounds like he needs to get a life. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Bernie. We can always get the straight up answer from you. This has just been such a great show. We've talked about some things that a lot of couples should have a conversation with. I'm going to say I think all these points, the point is, should we have a conversation? Dr. Katrina said something. Anything that we do should be for the sanctity of the marriage. That was in the comment you just made. I think you can roll all these topics right into what you just said. Protect the marriage, keep the communication strong, do whatever it is you need to do to protect the marriage. So I'm going to agree with that. We certainly want to thank all of you today for these uncomfortable conversations. I think they weren't so uncomfortable, but more we talked about, should you have it or just, and when you don't have these conversations, we see marriages suffer. So we want to thank you so much. Oftentimes, we yield to peer pressure, even our girlfriends. We have to be careful. We don't allow girlfriends into our marriage. Advice, men, the same thing. You shouldn't ask him this. You should ask him that. Your ultimate authority. So let's be clear about our mission here is that we want to table, should you have conversations, especially in this arena of marriage and protecting that. So we'll be here next week. We want to thank our guests here again, Bernie Mock, Dr. Katrina Esau, Ariel Giordano. We've had a great show. Thank you so much for tuning in to Uncomfortable Conversations. And we'll have another hot topic next week. We want to thank our show producer, Daryl A. Johnson, and also Alan Chapin, our engineer, and of SBIN Network. They do a great job each week of bringing clarity and bringing great topics. We'll see you guys next week.